Today is episode 7 of Distressed Deals Decoded, where real estate problems meet real solutions, brought to you by your friends at Asset Resolution Advisors. Today, we're diving into another issue about the emerging opportunities for real estate investors and real estate agents. Before we get going, Patrick, any comments about our episode 7?
Well, it's funny. This is actually probably our 12th episode, but we skipped episode 7, Steve. Somehow we missed number 7. Math wasn't our strong suit, apparently. So, yeah, we're going back a little bit, but they'll still be every single week, ladies and gentlemen. Never fear, Asset Res is here.
All right, so we'll get started for today's topic, which is behind the curtain how lenders or mortgage servicers actually review a short sale. One of the biggest frustrations in the short sale process, or is not really the process itself, is just the silence, right? Everybody gets frustrated. They say how it takes too long. If you go look at our podcast from last week, we talked about why it seems like it takes long. This week, we want to talk about what actually is going on. Clients ask us for updates every few days. Agents feel pressure from their clients. They think that if we push the bank, that it'll get something going. That sitting around is doing nothing. Everybody thinks things are just stalling out because they haven't heard from anybody. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to go behind the scenes and we're going to describe exactly what's going on, what loan servicers are doing, why it doesn't move faster, and why silence in some of these situations are okay. So again, welcome to the Distressed Deals Decoded. We're going to talk about all of the issues here regarding what is going on behind the scenes. So Patrick, let's get us started. What are some of the core misunderstandings that agents have, real estate investors have, people on the transactional side that they just don't know what's going on?
Yep. And it's funny because I guess real estate agents, Steve and Juan, sometimes are like the ringleader of the transaction, right? Well, I shouldn't say sometimes, always are. In traditional real estate agents generally are involved. There's a buyer's agent, there's a seller's agent. And one phrase that is always used, especially in real estate law and in contracts, is that time is of the essence, meaning things should move quickly because time is never anybody's friend. The same is true in the world of short sales. However, the banks and the lien holders don't operate under that principle. They don't move to get things done quickly. They move to get things done properly in accordance with their guidelines. So they're not negotiated in the way that we would anticipate real time. They're done through a process, not so much a sense of urgency. They go through a workflow. What we talked about last week, too, super important. If the deal's not prepped properly, then it's going to take a long time because it's going to go back to square one, back to square one. So having everything done right, having it properly underwritten, having it properly stacked is critical. We talked about silence. Now, that is probably the most frustrating thing that we experience as consumers, as real estate professionals, as investors, is man, I'm not hearing anything. And I just can't wait any longer. I need to know what the heck is happening. So let me call the short sale team and bug them. Why am I doing that? Probably because my buyer is bugging me as the buyer's agent, or maybe even the seller is wondering what the heck's going on. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my house. I got a letter from the bank. So silence can be frightening in some cases. Very important as we all convey what the process looks like, that we share that upfront, that we share it with the consumer, that we share it with the agents, and set the expectations correctly as to what may be going down the path. Secondly, if the file was underwritten properly, we also know how many liens there are that need to be dealt with. Some of the surprises may not appear at first, but we'll know, okay, there's some messy stuff here. Expect this to take a little longer. Expect it to take a few months to get through all of this because we've got to get through with the primary lien holder to be able to get the payoffs or partial payoffs for the other lien holders, and all that takes more time. So understanding what we're looking at going into it is also vitally important in setting expectations. So the pro tip here is real estate professionals, agents, and investors set the expectations up clearly. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't make it seem like it's going to happen instantaneously because it pretty much won't. If you're members of our school community, we do have some resource materials that actually have a list of all of the process elements that take place. And something that you could share with your consumer clients. Hey, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. These steps won't happen because it's not one of these transactions. And therefore, you can now give them a sense of process. And where are we now? Is this done? Yeah, that one's done. That's done. We're still waiting on this. They at least know where they are, right? Sometimes it's important to know, hey, we're past the 50-yard line. We're approaching the red zone. We're getting ready to score. Knowing that is important as opposed to all the nitty-gritty details. So I'll go back to you in the studio, Steve.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think it's what everybody has to understand is the banks are moving sequentially through their process. They have a process. Um, you know, Trying to get them to move faster really doesn't work. It their process is their process, and also understand from our standpoint, we spend a lot of time making sure we're following up regularly. So even though there's some silence, something we're doing, and we'll talk about that more. So Juan, um, let's dive into this now. So why don't you go through for us some of the workflow of what is actually going on so that our listeners and real estate agents they kind of know what the servicer's doing when they get the short sale offer.
Right. And let's break it down. We're gonna break it down to like about 6 steps. From the stage of we've already discussed that the real estate agent has done their due diligence, they've done some good prep work to get this file to this point where now we can start submitting over to our, the servicer and start the a short sale process. So, we spoke, and we can't speak enough about preparation. Once we have those things prepared and we have a listing, we have a buyer, one of the first steps that we want to make sure that are ensured in the process is that we have the financial forms on hand, right? Whether that be a mortgage assistant application, a hardship documentation, or an RMA form, right? Which is used for many different reasons, such as short sales, modifications, things of that nature, loss to start that loss mitigation process. We need an executed contract with all of the addendums. So then when we receive it at ARA, what we do is we go deep dive on making sure that the offer is accurate, that all the documents are filled out. So basically, checking for red flags, crossing all our T's and dotting all our I's, so that these files have a less likelihood of rejection, right, or denial upon arrival. And that's one of the worst things that end up prolonging the process is no one's really going with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that all of documentation, including title, the preliminary settlement statement, so that the banks know what fees are on there, which again, ARA is going to go make sure that there isn't any weird fees, right? Or non-allowable fees or wrong or incomplete seller information, or that we have the wrong homeowner on the deed signing documentation, that we have the right borrowers on the thing. So most people don't want to do all of that. They don't want to take a second or third view of all of the documentation that they're submitting prior to learning how to do this with the team. I thought a short sale was like, well, let's get some sort of a hardship form over to the servicing company, and hopefully they can approve a short sale. I didn't know about the preparation of a listing. I didn't know about any of the financial documentations that needed to be included. I didn't even know that you would have to go ahead and get title, lien search, or preliminary settlement statement so that you can even start initiating this thing the right way. And so this back and forth disconnect when you don't have those steps literally is why it takes weeks and months and possibly even over a year to get a lot of these things passed through or even reviewed by the servicing company, right? And so it matters to have a complete file, because any incomplete file is just going to sit there at the servicer level, and it's not going anywhere, right? You're going to go get an update, and it's just going to sit in limbo, right? Because they have, and most people don't realize this, that most servicers have thousands upon thousands of files on their desk,
Hmm.
thousands, right? And so if I am behind the desk and I'm dealing with, for lack of a better word, a schmuck that submitted a file without everything that I need, man, I'm going to put that on the bottom and I'm just going to go sort for the ones that are going to make my life a little bit easier so that I can move those files along, right? Until somebody raises their hand and calls me and says, where is this file? And then I can give you an update. It's not automatic is, and I think people have that misunderstanding that this stuff is not like, well, the system triggered that it's missing this document, and immediately upon cue you received a notification that you missed X document, or that you spelled something incorrectly, that you didn't provide XYZ, resource in order to continue the process. This is manual stuff. We're still a little antiquated when it comes to how these things are processed. But if you know from that standpoint, like from the very beginning, that these things are needed, well, then we can move the files along a lot easier with a completed package, right? And so, Steve, when they receive it, right, when they have a confirmation of this of the package, what happens after that?
Yeah, so let's talk about the next steps. So you're 100% correct, Juan. They get the complete short sale, they put it into their system, right? Sometimes we upload it, there's a combination of things, and it goes through the next step. The very next step, which is supposed to happen, is they tell us, yes, we have a complete package. That means they've gone through all the documents. Now you have to consider this, that when they get the document, the first thing that they do, that the servicers do, is they say, okay, who are the owners, who are the borrowers, which type of loan is it, who's the loan investor. Sometimes the loan investor has multiple layers to it, right? So you've got Fannie, Freddie, FHA, this, that, but there's even additional layers on top of that. There's sometimes mortgage insurance. So they're looking at all of these things that they put into their system, and it creates their guideline, right? Their template that they need to know, okay, which one of the servicers and which one of the templates am I following? And then they make sure all the documents. Once they have that, they say, yes, I've got a complete package for this particular investor and investor set of groups, right? So this is sometimes where the delays happen, right?
Can I
This,
interrupt you briefly, Steve, on
yeah,
that? So, little anecdotal point. Years ago, when we were working together still, we were doing a direct mail outsource service for a default loan servicer called Zenta on behalf of Saxon Mortgages. And they said, hey, can you devise a software system to create letters based on permutations and combinations of what you just spoke about? You know how many different letter types there were? 8,000 of them based upon investor, time zone. Oh my God, dude. So go on. I just had to share
right, right.
that.
So this is what the servicer in their initial package intake is going through, right? Is they have all these permutations that they need to follow. They need to make sure all the documents, do they have everything? Do they not have everything? So this is all going on in the first days, right? So assuming they got everything, they need to go through all this. We go and we check to make sure that they received it, and they might tell us, hey, it might be a week or two before they get it done. This is where the quiet delay is okay, right? This is where they're putting everything in. Multiple departments sometimes have to look at it. There might be a legal hold, there might be insurance proceeds. There's so many different things going on behind the scenes that this is what the servicer's doing. They have to start, they open the file and then they have to start filing for their, if they're a bank or non-bank or whatever, they have certain federal requirements that they have to follow. They have to do their OFAC searches. They order title. They have to start looking at whether they need to do a BPO or an appraisal. So all of these things are going on behind the scenes, and they're not automated. You would think in today's world that AI would do all this or that somebody would do all this, but it's not, right? There's so many things going on that documents and they need to be read, and it's just not there yet. Maybe one day we'll get there. We hope, but it is what they have right now, and it's very very manual, and that part just takes time to get done. Um, Once they get the intake and they say, yes, we have everything, then what they do is they open up the file internally, they assign it to whoever. Some companies have an underwriter and a negotiator. Some have only a negotiator. Some have only an underwriter. So again, we're talking about multiple levels, multiple people touching the actual document. Plus, you will also most likely have some type of investor person who's responsible for a certain thing. So there's so many different ways that this property is going through, right? So you can imagine of the most complicated is goes to an underwriter. The underwriter checks that the person who put all the documents in were correct and that they got the right, they got the right guideline and they got the right scripting and they got all the right documents. Then it goes to the negotiator. The negotiator has to make sure which investor is it. Does this investor have to look at it? So, I mean, it goes on and on and on. This is why behind the scenes it's so complicated, why we don't hear things for a week or two, because you have multiple people touching this and depending on their queues, as Juan said, they're not just working on one or two or five or 10, they're working on hundreds of these. So they have to go through this every day and look at it, make sure that they have what they need to get just their part done. And then it goes to the next person. So depending on where it is in the next person's queue, just takes a while. Then as we get through this process, once they verify all the pieces, the last piece they do is they finally order the value. So that's where we trigger of getting the value, which is sort of that next milestone, the next step that we're trying to get to, because that means it's already gone through all the other steps. And then finally we could get to the value, which is really where the rubber meets the road and really where we want to get to. And this is the next important milestone. I'm gonna pass the next section of what servicers do to Patrick, because this is really where he excels in when we start talking about the valuation process. So
Yep.
Patrick, take it
So,
away.
yeah. So to your point, it's either going to be a broker's price opinion or an appraisal, depending on guidelines, right? And that is lender, servicer, investor specific. The the lender, the servicer, is not valuing the property as a typical home seller may or the tax collectors may. It's not based on emotion. It's not based on anything other than empirical data to figure out what their best net recovery is going to be in this sale versus a foreclosure or versus a deed in lieu of foreclosure or some other outcome. That's very important. And that's why short sales may or may not be great investor opportunities, because they have to hit that price point that's vital. We talked about that in other webinars, and we'll revisit that again. Some can be great opportunities, but they're really looking for that net recovery. As far as whether it's a BPO, broker price opinion, or an appraisal, either one is fine. However, we do know for a fact that sometimes real estate agents that are chosen to do brokers price opinions, there are all levels of skill sets and or familiarity with local markets, right? I mean, you could be on one side of the tracks versus another side of the tracks, and values can vary dramatically, even though they appear to have the same comparables. So, as a real estate agent, listing agent, even the buyer's agent, it's vital that we collectively go in there knowing what the value should be, realistically, not what we hope it will be. And if there's any issues with condition, deferred maintenance, hidden things such as mold behind the drywall that's known about, or whatever, it's really important that the agent conveys that to the person doing the valuation, because they may run in, do their thing, and run out. They're getting paid $50, $75, $150 or whatever, and they're trying to turn them and burn them. So take that time, make it easy for them. And don't just hand them paper, because you're going to throw that away or spill coffee on it. You can show it to them on your computer, and then email it to them. If they say, yes, I'd like to get a copy of that, it does help. And if you're making their job easier, it goes a long way towards that. So, and the
And
key yeah, go ahead, Steve.
oh, I was going to add one more thing, which has come up quite often, right? Especially in a market today that we see is there's so many things changing, especially downwards, which is not
Mm-hmm.
good. But we've had recently, probably in the last 6, 8 weeks, where we put a property on the market, we get an offer that we think is decent. We start our short sale process, right? Again, weeks go by, and then we're at the valuation section of this, and all of a sudden 2 or 3 or 4 other properties came up on the market at a lower price.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had agents are like, well, should I tell the person that these just came up on the market and they're lower? Like, yes, these are really good examples to go tell them that, hey, you're going backwards 6 or 8 or 10 months. Our value is much lower than what's out there. But if you look at what was just put on the market, we're above that, and it can give
Yep.
a big advantage to where we sit in the market on a value.
Yeah, which we won't spend a lot of time on this piece. I'll just mention it. But if that in fact happens, what we end up doing is, if it makes sense to do so, is starting a value dispute with the lender. And then that's what that's all about. Say, hey, we think you may have missed something. And there's a process for that. That can add more time to the short sale. So I'm going to pass the baton over to Juan. Now that we've got the
Yeah.
valuation done, they're going to be looking at net proceeds. Talk to us about it.
Well, yeah, and it's a phenomenal like segue for that because this is where like the real decision does happen, right? The servicers are not just they're citing whether what is the best outcome, right? They're gonna compare, do I is it a better outcome on a short sale net, foreclosure, deed in lieu, right? What is the highest capacity for them to recover? Because they have to recover, right? Like that, they're not here to just give away the property, right? These things we want to find out if it meets the minimum thresholds. There are other factors that they're looking into, right, that most people don't see, which is like they're analyzing and going through mortgage insurance, bonds, pool insurance, foreclosure timelines, property preservation costs, legal expenses, taxes, HOA, municipal liens, carrying costs, risk, exposure. I mean, there's a plethora of things that are being decided in order to understand, like, which route makes the most sense for us to recover from the note holder, right? The note owner side of things, in order to recover on this particular deal, right? And most investors and agents, they never see that kind of math. It's just, hey, do we have an approval or not? Can they accept our offer or not? Missing out on so many different layers that these servicing companies have to peel in order to go ahead and make the best decision, not only for the investor but also to make sure that on the sales side, right? Like they're doing the proper evaluation and that they've looked at all the documentation. Again, it goes even deeper than that in regards to some of the regulations and processes that they have to do in order for them to recover some of the losses. We might do another podcast in regards to that because it does go deeper than just that. And so when they make a decision, there's going to be three things that happen. Okay, they're going to either accept the offer that's on the table, given all of the documentations and everything that they receive. They're going to counter, right? To either the investor to up their price if the price is a little bit higher than originally submitted, or they're going to deny it. Maybe there's something critical there that they say, hey, this thing, we're better off going this route in a foreclosure than doing this short sale, or accepting this particular offer, or they found something in the evaluation. Some of these properties, and that's another topic I think that we can go into, Steve, is the ultimate condition of that property. Some of these investors just will not approve any offer whatsoever, and they have to either foreclose or mediate the property before they sell it to anyone, right? And so the amount of check-ins that we do doesn't change really the math, right? ARA does the best that they can to, dispute on most of the cases that, there is a path where it makes sense to counter or to, negotiate with the lenders. But, the final say is going to be the lender upon, doing all of those reviews, right? So Steve, why are updates so infrequent? Why do we go to silence? And the honest truth about the silence is sometimes better than pounding them with updates, every single day.
I sigh because it's just fact of where we're at, right? Um, there are a lot of things that go into this. First, before the most current administration came in, we
Mhm.
had a very powerful CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Right.
They were a government oversight watchdog, if you will, that made sure that consumers were taken care of or not treated poorly or whatever the case might be associated with any of their consumer loans. So it's mortgages, cars, credit cards, whatever. One of the things they did, which I did like, was they had essentially an quote unquote enforcement process where if you were out of time frame for a specific loss mitigation like a short sale and you didn't hear back in the 30 days that's required by the guideline, you can file
Mhm.
a complaint. They would go to the bank and the bank had to respond back to the government, and lo and behold you would get some type of response. This was a nice symbiotic relationship because one, we would keep up with the servicer in that 30-day mark, and they usually kept up with it knowing they didn't want the government to get at them. And in worst case scenario, we went to the CFPB, filed the complaint, we got something back. The enforcement went away last year. So because the
Mhm.
enforcement went away, that 30-day mark is no longer really being held on to. So servicers really don't have to give us updates because they have nobody pressuring them on the other side. They're just going to do what they're going to do when they want to do it. So they don't give us status updates like, what are they going to say? Hey, sorry guys, like, I've got 900 cases and I'm doing nothing on yours. No, I mean, they're not going to say, oops, I forgot about yours for 4 weeks. Let me get to it now. They're, they're never going to admit what they are, what they're not doing. Sometimes it's honest stuff like, hey, we're waiting for this, we're waiting for that, we're waiting for somebody
Mhm.
internally to do something. They're not going to rat out the people internally either. So really, really, they're just, what we do and what anybody can do if you're doing a short sale, an agent, investor, if you're going after it, is kindness, right? You call them up, say, hey, I'm calling up. Do you have any updates for me? They say, hey, no. At the very best, it's going to trigger them to take a look at their queue and say, oops, I forgot to do something. Or,
Right.
hey, I better
Right.
go talk to somebody. Or, geez, this is just not moving fast enough. Let me see what I can do to escalate. You call them, if you call them every day, they're going to stop answering your call and they're just going to put you at the bottom. They're going to be mad because you are. So there's a balance. Most of the time, it's just that there's no new information, right? We're just not hitting the next milestone. We just haven't got there. A lot of times we get everything to them. We're waiting for the approval document. How come we don't have it? I don't know. Sometimes it's their system. Sometimes it's the person who has to hit approve. Like there's so many different things going on. Calling too many times can actually slow the process down. So what we're really trying to do is we're just trying to make sure that they're doing what they're doing and they do it at their pace. And at this point, there's not a whole lot we can do with respect to giving them a little bit of a push. The only thing we can do is we call regularly every 2 to 3 days. We're kind with what we're asking for, and we're just seeing if we're moving along. And sometimes they'll give you a date when they'll get back to you. Other times they don't. And it's the environment we're in with, and we just to Patrick's point early on in the podcast, set everybody's expectation for the reality of what's going to go on and what we might encounter.
Yep. And that I think you covered that CFPB piece pretty completely. The one thing that I will say is an
Oh, sorry.
advantage. No, no, it's okay. Is an advantage for a company like Asset Resolution Advisors is
Mhm.
we handle a lot of deals. Not as many as the servicers are. I wish we did, actually. So folks, if you want to send us a
And we
short list,
will. We will.
we will. But we've got at any given time dozens with any one of the large
Mhm.
lenders and servicers. So there's that relationship that's there. And you always hate it when the processor that you've been dealing with at Freddie Mac goes to another department or has a baby or quits or whatever they do, because then you got to kind of build that from scratch again. But there's a lot to be said about being in a regular communication with these folks
Mhm.
and having a number of files that can get chipped away at one time. So it saves everybody time. And Steve, you really nailed it. Yelling at people is not going to get you anywhere in this space for sure, because they're not in front of you. If they were at a desk and you could choke them, that's one thing. but they're in Dallas or they're wherever the servicing department happens to be. So you're not gonna get anywhere with that kind of an attitude. So back to you, Steve.
Thanks. All right. Well, let's get to wrapping this podcast up. I think we've had a lot of really good information for everybody. If you want to do short sales on your own or you want to work with us, what do we do different, and what can we relate to everybody? Number one, probably the most important thing, set realistic timelines up front. It's going to take 4 to 6 weeks. It might be delayed another week or two, depending on certain things. The time frame starts when you actually send in not the offer, but when you send the offer into the servicer. We try to make sure we educate everybody, sellers, agents, investors, buyers, everybody up front that this is going to take a while. We communicate to everybody that it's a process. There's no sense of this false urgency of, hey, we're going to close next week, next week, next week. We really try to get everything done as quickly as possible, understanding that we are dealing with the third party on their own time frames. We don't want anybody to panic. We want to make sure everybody just understands that this is going to take time. We don't want relistings that just take longer. We don't want mistakes happening. We don't want deals to be abandoned. This is just, it is a process. We go down the process. We make sure that we're good with the process. And we have a time frame that we've been doing this for years to know what works and what doesn't. And that's really, we follow this process week in and week out, day in and day out. And it works. And sometimes it's slower than we'd like, but it works. Mm-hmm. So, short sales aren't about speed. I have had short sales approved in a day. I've had short sales approved in weeks and weeks and weeks and months. It just happens. It's about precision. It's about patience. Right. It's about understanding how the system works and being able to communicate effectively to everybody. And that's really the key to getting the deals done. So, if you're working a short sale, you want expert guidance through each milestone submission. Send your deal over to us. We'll take a look at it. We can help you. If you want to do it yourself and you want to manage the entire process, come join our school. We'll walk you through who you need to be talking to, when, where, how often. Give you some of that information that you need to communicate back to your sellers, your buyers, to make sure that your short sales go as well as you can. So join our community. Learn how to manage your short sales without losing your clients, without losing your credibility, and keeping control of each sale. So that's all we have for today. And thank you for listening. And we'll see you next week on our next podcast.